It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
It's been a little while, but I want to welcome back Congressman Bruce Westerman is with us. Bruce, thanks for coming back on, sir.
Hey, Paul, great to be on with you. Good to start the morning off with a little toe-tapping music from a guy born in the 4th District of Arkansas.
That's exactly right. Now, Congressman Westerman, where are you right now? Are you in D.C.? Are you en route home? What's going on with you?
I am at my home in Hot Springs. I got here about 12:30 this morning, so
All right.
It's great to be home.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad that you're back. All right, so talk to us a little bit about what's going on in Washington, D.C. Now, let me start first here, because I'll highlight this press release that I saw back on March the 6th that came out of your office. It has to do with a bill that you're working on called the FLIP Act, and it has to do with National Park Services and some sort of backlog that's going on. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Paul, that's a bill that I've been working on for over a year, gathering information and trying to understand the situation better and come up with the correct language for the bill. I was glad to file that. I serve on the Natural Resources Committee, where we have jurisdiction over all the federal lands, and I'm also on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where we look a lot at the infrastructure across the country. And just on our federal lands, we have about $18 billion of maintenance backlog, and most of that's in the National Park Service. And probably folks have visited some of our national parks across the country. They've seen some of this deteriorating infrastructure that we've got. A lot of it's in roads, but a lot of it's in things that you can't see, like sewage systems and water treatment systems that are there in the parks. So, I thought I could help with this overall maintenance issue across the country by coming up with a creative way to help fix the maintenance on our federal lands. And as the further I got into it, we've got this fund out there called the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It was set up in the 1960s. It takes part of the royalty off of energy production offshore. And what the immediately previous administration used it a lot for was to acquire new federal land. So that makes absolutely no sense to me that we've got all this land across the country, has a huge maintenance backlog, and we were using money to acquire new land instead of take care of the land we got. So basically what my bill does, it's called the Federal Lands Infrastructure Partnership Act, is it takes money from the Land and Water Conservation Fund and gets it back to what I think more of its original purpose was, to send money to the states to work on keeping up the properties that we've got. And it also would set up a way to study offshore energy production to make it safer and more efficient in the future. So you've got a self-perpetuating way to take care of maintenance on federal land. And that's money that doesn't have to come off of other infrastructure projects. I'm excited about that, and hope to see it move forward.
That's certainly interesting that what you said, the fund was being used earlier to just acquire more and more land, and while we have other land that we own that's deteriorating, that doesn't make any sense. That's just kind of constantly increasing the burden of maintenance on the taxpayer. You mentioned that you're on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee as well, and I know you may not have any details, or you guys may not be looking into this, but did you see that brand new bridge that collapsed down in Miami on the campus of Florida International University? And I mean, that was a tragedy. It just happened out of nowhere.
Yeah, and I've seen some of the news snippets. I don't know any of the details about it.
Wow.
But, my background's in engineering, so anything like that kind of piques my interest when I hear about it. I just haven't had time to look into the details.
I haven't had a lot of time either. What was interesting to me was, it had just been put up, and a few days earlier, some of the construction companies, I guess, that, had been contracted to do it, they had photos of the bridge and had tweeted how great they were, how honored they were, what a good job they did of this and supporting this structure and that structure. Of course, they went and deleted those tweets after the bridge collapsed, and I think we now have at least 4 people who have been tragically, crushed to death. And so
I saw where the death count was up to 6 on it, but that is a real tragedy. I didn't realize it was a new construction. So
yeah,
but we've got a lot of old crumbling infrastructure that's in danger of that happening as well that we need to take care of. When we look at our federal land, the U.S. government owns about a third of the country, and that's more than the British government owns of the United Kingdom, to put that in perspective, with a much larger land mass. Now, there's still some instances where you might have an inholding in federal land, where you could use Land and Water Conservation Fund to square up a boundary or to make a trade with federal land that's in an inholding somewhere else. We still have provisions in there to be able to do that, but most of that money in the Land and Water Conservation Fund would be directed towards taking care of what we've got instead of acquiring new assets.
Yeah, well,
there's also things like in Hot Springs, which is a national park. You've got the bathhouses there that are a drain on the maintenance backlog, but the national park in Hot Springs has started leasing those bathhouses out. There's a brewery in one of them. There's going to be a boutique hotel. So when you do that with the private sector, you're taking it off of the maintenance backlog of the Park Service, and somebody else is coming in and taking care of the maintenance and keeping the structure up, plus generating a little bit of income. So we need to do more stuff like that as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea, anytime you're going from federal ownership to more private ownership. I think that's good. A lot of people are uncomfortable with the amount of land that the federal government owns. But I mean, if we do own it, you gotta fund it, I guess, at some point and try to take care of stuff. But I do agree, it's certainly a good idea not to keep buying more land if we can't take care of the land we already have. That doesn't make any sense. No normal person would run their household that way. We're talking with Congressman Bruce Westerman. Go ahead, sir.
Well, another area that I do a lot of work in is forestry. I'm the only forester in Congress, and a lot of those issues come my way. The federal government owns 192 million acres of timberland, and you would think if you own that much timberland, it would be of great wealth. But with all the recreation fees, the timber harvest off of it, it generates less than 3% of what it costs the federal government to own that land. So we can do better than that. There was a time in this country when the federal forests paid their own way, and not only are they not paying their own way, they're becoming less healthy and subject to wildfire, which costs even more money to go put the fire out. So there's some things that are upside down in the thinking and execution on how we manage this federal land.
Yeah, definitely. We're talking with Congressman Bruce Westerman. He's from District 4. So, Congressman, let's talk about the tax cuts that you voted for. I was... more money in people's pockets. It's starting to actually really show up now. I think people are realizing how good tax cuts are for, their own personal budget, but also the economy in general. So what can you tell us about the tax cuts?
Well, I can say what we're seeing now is just the tip of the iceberg. And we saw the immediate benefits in February when people started seeing more take-home pay because of the lower rates. And we also saw before that all these companies giving bonuses and increasing hourly wages. But, the count right now is over 4 million people. They received over $4 billion in benefits just from companies that are sharing their wealth with their employees. And we're going to see even more of that with things that weren't even expected, like with Entergy, which is regulated by the Public Service Commission. Because of the tax cut, their profits are going to be higher, so they're going to be sending millions of dollars back to the ratepayers in Arkansas. So you'll see lower electric bills because of the tax cut. But I was talking to a gentleman yesterday who has a lot of manufacturing in the 4th District, and he said that the best thing in the tax bill was a rapid depreciation schedule that we put in there that most people probably wouldn't even think about that. But when you're making a big capital investment in a business, if you can write that investment off quicker instead of having to have a long depreciation schedule, it's a big incentive to go ahead and make those investments. So when manufacturers are buying new equipment and expanding their operations, when they buy that equipment, there's somebody making that equipment somewhere that's increasing their workload. So it's a real domino effect when you start doing stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll, as time goes forward, we'll see more and more benefits from the tax code. And the Democrats are still out there saying it's crumbs and it's a bad deal. And I'll just let them keep on saying that, because I know the people that I'm talking to, everything from school teachers to factory workers to people working in retail, who are seeing more money on their paychecks and are happy about what we did.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. And even if you look at that Pennsylvania race where the Democrat squeaked out a win there, I mean, he had to run on really, I think right-leaning issues. Yeah, he had to basically convince them that he was, basically a Democrat that believed in Republican policy, if you go look at what he was campaigning on.
Yeah, I had a reporter stick a microphone in my face yesterday and ask me about the race, and is this a wake-up call? And I think it is a wake-up call that as Republicans we have to make sure that our base gets out. But special elections are just that. They're special. It's hard to get turnout. And I told them, I said, this Connor Lamb guy was running like he was a Republican. He was claimed to be pro-life and pro-Second Amendment, pro-business, anti-Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
If you looked at the bullet points, he was running like a Republican, and the reporter said, but he says he still doesn't. He's pro-life. He thinks women should have a choice, and he's against the 20-week abortion ban and that sort of thing. I said, well, that may be pro-life in Pennsylvania, but I don't think that flies in Arkansas if you think you should still be able to get an abortion after 20 weeks.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the pain capable, the child, and all the studies that they've done there past 20 weeks. Hey, President Trump, he recently mentioned maybe a round 2 of tax cuts. I mean, he was at an event and he said something about it, and I just thought, wow. I mean, gosh, can you imagine? I mean, have you heard anything about that? Aside from what the president said publicly about a potential round 2 of tax cuts sometime.
Well, I think there will be some more tax legislation when you have a big tax bill like that, and it starts getting implemented all across the country. You find some things that need to be corrected. They call those technical correction bills. I think we'll have one of those to clarify some issues when you get down into the weeds, and the IRS is trying to figure out how to implement the law we passed. I think you'll see a technical correction bill. And another thing that we're really pushing for in the House is when we were going through the tax cut bill, the Democrats were making all this noise about how it was not permanent, how the individual cuts were going to go away. Well, the reason they weren't permanent is because of Senate Democrats who wouldn't give them the 60 votes to make it permanent. So there's already legislation in the House to make the individual tax cuts permanent, and we'll let them. There were zero big goose egg Democrats that voted for the tax cut bill in the House or the Senate. So we may give them a chance to put up or shut up.
When I've had you on in the past, and it might have been last year sometime, I can't remember specifically, but we were talking about the budget process and actually going by the process of what you're supposed to do with the appropriation bills and things like that. Can you give us an update on that? Do we still have ways to go to return to maybe a more regular order?
Oh my gosh, we've got a lot of ground to make up on that. I will say in the House last year we had regular order. We passed all 12 appropriation bills, had them down to the Senate in September before the fiscal year expired. The Senate has yet to take up a single appropriation bill in committee. And here we are next week. There's another omnibus bill to finish funding the government through September 30th of this year. So the big holdup on that is this 60-vote rule in the Senate, where you cannot bring a bill up even to debate it without getting cloture, which means you got to get 60 votes. So the Senate Democrats know that all they have to do is not let a bill come up, and it forces these shutdown situations or deadlines, and it gives them all the negotiating power when you get to that point. Now, it's not all Senate Democrats' fault, because Senate Republicans can change the rule on appropriation bills to where it takes a simple majority vote to bring them up to vote on. But that's a long-standing rule in the Senate. I totally get why there's the cloture rule. The Senate itself was put in place to help protect the minority.
Mm-hmm.
It even goes back to the roots of our electoral voting system, that every state has 2 senators and has equal say in Congress, whereas in the House it's all based on population. So, our founders were behind this concept of giving a voice to the minority, but we have a constitutional mandate to fund the government, and when they're using rules to obstruct funding the government versus doing it constructively, there's a problem with that. Now, on authorizing language, where you're actually changing the law and putting new policy in place, that cloture rule is not a bad thing. If you look back into history, and this is a speech I heard Ben Sass give, the senator from Nebraska, who's got a PhD in history. He said that there were 3 times when one party had the majority in the House, a filibuster-proof vote in the Senate, and the president. He said that was when we got the New Deal with Franklin Roosevelt and the Democratic House and the Democratic Senate, when we got the Great Society with Lyndon Johnson with the Democratic House and the Democratic Senate, and when we got Obamacare with Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid. So he makes a strong case for why the filibuster rule is important, but all of those were policy issues. They weren't funding issues, but they greatly affected our funding and debt in the long run.
Congressman Bruce Westerman, I appreciate you coming on the program, sir, and starting your weekend with us, and I hope you have a good one.
Yeah, well, it's good to be back in Arkansas, and always good to visit with you, Paul, and I understand you're have got a bigger and broader audience now, so congratulations on that.
Hey, I appreciate that. Yeah, we do. We're thankful for the folks who are listening, and we're happy to be a medium for you to talk to the people anytime.
Well, my pleasure. You have a blessed day.
All righty, you too. Congressman Bruce Westerman, everybody. It's Johnny Cash Friday, back in just a moment.